For decades, the US Coast Guard has been cracking down on the cartel's drug trafficking operations. But every time it seems they've finally cracked the code, the cartels cook up something new. Like on September 13, 2008, 350 miles west of Guatemala, when a narco submarine was stopped by authorities. Its crew of 4 immediately surrendered, but in a split second, the suspects were in the water swimming toward the Coast Guard boat as their vessel sank to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Of course, this was no accident, no trace, no case. But this would be the very last time that narco traffickers would get away with that trick. The early narco subs were actually not submarines. They were semi-submersibles. Since most of their hull is submerged, narco subs are like floating logs in the middle of the ocean, quite difficult to detect. But that wasn't their biggest advantage. Narco subs were equipped with a system of drainage valves designed to make them quick and easy to sink. So upon being spotted, the smugglers would scuttle their own vessel. According to international maritime law, the Coast Guard had to rescue the survivors. And since all the drugs sank inside the narco sub, there was no evidence of wrongdoing. But all that changed in 2008, when the United States closed that loophole with the Drug Trafficking Vessel Interdiction Act, making it a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison to operate an unflagged semi-submersible, even with no drugs on board. Within a year, Colombia followed with another law, imposing up to 12 years for simply building semi-submersibles. No wonder narco subs are now made in remote makeshift jungle workshops. But what might surprise you is that narco subs always end up sinking to the bottom of the ocean, regardless of their mission's success. If the traffickers made it to their destination undetected, they would sink this one-way transport vessel. And if they got caught on the way, the authorities would sink it for them. In fact, any vessel that's interdicted, whether it's a go-fast boat, a low-profile vessel, or a narco submarine, will be scuttled by the Coast Guard. That's because they cannot transport them back to shore, and leaving them afloat would be a navigation hazard. The only part of the boat that comes back with the Coast Guard is the engine's top cowling, a little souvenir. Of course, before scuttling the narco vessel, the authorities would get in and offload any cargo of interest into their own boats. Any bales of narcotics that may have been thrown overboard would also get collected. And don't feel sad for the sea turtle that ended up tangled in these bales of cocaine, because upon closer inspection, he also had a straw stuck up in his nose. I think the turtle and I agree. That was the best line of the script. The cartels transport the majority of their goods on watercraft for 2 main reasons. First, boats can carry much heavier loads compared to hiding contraband in luggages inside vehicles during border crossings or chartering their own cocaine-filled airplanes. The second reason is that the ocean is massive. The Maritime Transit Zone is a 6 million square mile area, almost twice the size of the continental United States. Now, before getting into how the Coast Guard can spot these needles in the ocean's haystack, let me jump to what they do to them. See, drug traffickers used to use sailboats and fishing boats for their dirty deeds. But once spotted, they couldn't escape the Coast Guard cutters. So in the 1980s, cartels transitioned to speedboats, also known as go-fast boats, which could actually outrun the cutters. To keep up with them, the Coast Guard had to get help from dolphins. But it's not what you think. In the late 1990s, the Helicopter Interdiction Tactical Squadron, or HITRON, was born, primarily made up of MH-65E Dolphin helicopters. Upon receiving the coordinates, the helo would launch from the flight deck of the cutter and approach the suspicious vessel. They would first sound a siren and ask the vessel to stop. But if the boat tries to escape, the chopper's crew would resort to something a bit more convincing. First, they would fire a series of warning shots right in front of the speeding vessel with a mounted M240 machine gun. The gunners call each short burst of fire a stitch. For most, that would be a compelling reason to stop. But if they don't, the gunner would grab his rifle, and this time he shoots to kill. Oh no, not the boat's crew. He shoots to kill the boat's engines, to bring the vessel to a stop. But seasoned smugglers know a clever trick called engine shielding. That's when they cover the boat's engines with their own bodies, because they know that the Coast Guard wouldn't risk taking a shot at the shielded engines from such a distance. These pesky smugglers seem to be well aware of their rights, but the Coast Guard ain't done with them. This is the Coast Guard's Long Range Interceptor, or LRI. It's a 35-foot-long high-speed vessel with a $1 million price tag. The LRI can simply roll into the water via the launch ramp on the stern of the cutter, which is very convenient since the cutter doesn't have to come to a complete stop to launch the boat. Now, if the smugglers try engine shielding, the LRI can catch up with them, and a gunner on board can take out the engines using a shotgun. From such close distance, the smugglers are quite unlikely to shield the engines. When narco-traffickers suspect that they might get arrested, their number one priority is to get rid of the evidence. So they start dumping bales of cocaine out of their speedboat as they flee the authorities. But that's to no avail, since all their movements are being recorded by maritime patrol aircraft. In fact, it's maritime patrol aircraft like the P-3 Orion and the HC-130J Super Hercules that scan vast areas of the ocean with the help of special sensors and radars. Once they detect something suspicious, the coordinates are sent to a nearby Coast Guard cutter to initiate the investigation. The Coast Guard also leverages intel from many other agencies, including the DoD, DHS, NSA, CIA, and FBI. Once the cartels realized that they could no longer outpace the Coast Guard, they began to swap speed with stealth. Low-profile vessels, or LPVs, sat very close to the surface of the water, making them more difficult to detect. The natural evolution of the LPVs is ultimately what gave rise to the infamous narco subs. El Chapo, who led the Mexico Sinaloa cartel in the 1990s and 2000s, was among the first to make use of narco submarines. But take a guess, how much narcotics does the Coast Guard reel in every year? 106 metric tons, or 234,000 pounds of pure, uncut cocaine. That's what the Coast Guard interdicted in 2024. Just so it's easier for you to visualize, this pallet weighs about 2,000 pounds. So they prevented about 110 pallets from getting to American shores, which was worth a whopping $4.5 billion in retail value. They seized about the same amount just in the first 6 months of 2025. According to a 2008 estimate, 2 or 3 narco subs carrying illegal drugs travel up the Pacific coast every single week. How many are caught by authorities? In 2008, the Coast Guard's estimate was 25%. That said, by 2025, roughly 80% of US-bound narcotics are believed to be seized on the ocean. Any narcotics seized end up going to incinerators to be destroyed. In some countries, illegal drugs are burned out in the open. I guess some of the officials in Iran are quietly hoping for a fair wind, just to catch a quick whiff. For the US Coast Guard, counter-narcotics missions aren't just about keeping cocaine out of the Americans' noses. These contrabands fund all the activities of the cartels, including smuggling weapons, which can be used in violent crimes on American soil, backing terrorist groups to carry out attacks, and buying off politicians to destabilize democracies. So every load that's intercepted cuts into the cartel's cash flow and is a blow to their operations. That said, just one fully loaded narco sub carries anywhere from $300 million to $500 million worth of cocaine. That's the retail price on Wall Street, on the streets. But the cartel's production cost is only 2 to 3%. So even if 90% of the narcotics were interdicted, the cartels would still make a very healthy profit margin. And that's how they can continue to invest in innovative ways of trafficking narcotics. For example, in July 2025, the Colombian Navy found a narco submarine equipped with a Starlink antenna. The innovative part, of course, was that the cartels are now experimenting with remotely controlled unmanned vessels, with zero risk of anyone getting caught. As the cartels use faster, stealthier, and more disposable methods of transportation, the role of the Coast Guards in the maritime transit zone becomes more important than ever. According to the CDC, in 2024, there were an estimated 80,391 drug overdose deaths in the United States. Cocaine accounted for only about 20%, with more than half of the overdose deaths involving fentanyl.